The morning began like any other in Oakwood Heights. I kissed my wife goodbye, packed a lunch with my 10-year-old son Ethan, and stood on the front porch, sipping coffee as he made his way to the bus stop at the end of our quiet cul-de-sac. We had only been living in the neighborhood for 3 months, and while the HOA had some overly strict and often laughable rules, we were starting to settle in. What I didn't expect that day was for my son to become the target of the HOA president's latest crusade. My phone rang just as I took another sip of coffee. It was Ethan. His voice was shaky. "Dad," he said, "there's a lady yelling at me about my backpack. She says it's against the HOA rules, and I'm not allowed to wait here anymore." In the background, I heard a shrill voice demanding he put me on speaker. My stomach tightened. "I'll be right there," I told him calmly, though my pulse was quickening. I grabbed my keys but left my department-issued vehicle behind. Sometimes it's better not to leave with a badge. When I arrived at the corner, I saw her, middle-aged, perfectly styled blonde bob, dressed head to toe in designer athleisure wear, and hovering over my son like a storm cloud. Karen Whitfield, the self-appointed dictator, sorry president of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association, was jabbing her finger toward Ethan's backpack. It was a Marvel superhero backpack I'd gotten him for his birthday. Red and blue, bright and fun, exactly what a 10-year-old boy should be proud to carry. And the way Ethan clutched it told me he wasn't just holding on to school supplies. He was holding on to his confidence. "Is there a problem here?" I asked, my voice level but firm, something I perfected in my years as a police officer. Karen turned toward me, her face flushed with the kind of smug righteousness that only HOA presidents and HOA Karen seem to master. "There is absolutely a problem," she said, crossing her arms. "I'm Karen Whitfield, president of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association, and your son is clearly violating community aesthetic standards." I placed a steady hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Aesthetic standards? For a child's backpack." She whipped out her phone, scrolling furiously. "Section 12, paragraph 3, she said triumphantly. "All items visible from community property must conform to the neighborhood palette of earth tones and neutrals. That monstrosity," she sneered, "is bright red and blue." I stared at her in stunned disbelief. "You're saying my son's backpack violates HOA rules because it's colorful?" Karen stood her ground. "Rules are rules. The bus stop is on HOA-maintained property. We have standards. If we let one child flaunt those rules, the next thing you know, there'll be neon lunchboxes and glitter shoes. Property values will nosedive." I took a slow breath and kept my voice measured. "Ma'am, it's a backpack. It's not a permanent fixture. It's a child waiting for the bus." She bristled. "Don't lecture me about HOA authority. I've been president for 6 years. I know every bylaw." She pointed a trembling finger toward Ethan. "He needs to leave this bus stop immediately or I'll call security." That was a moment I couldn't help but chuckle. Security? For a kid's backpack. Ethan looked up at me, wide-eyed, waiting to see how I'd respond. Confusion clouded Ethan's eyes, and worry was etched across his face. I leaned down and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, buddy. You've done nothing wrong," I said quietly. Just then, the school bus rounded the corner, approaching the stop with a low rumble. I gestured for Ethan to get ready, but before he could take a step, Karen planted herself firmly between him and the curb. "He's not getting on that bus from this stop," she snapped, her tone sharp and unwavering. "Not with that backpack. Those are the rules." That was the moment I decided it was time to formally introduce myself. "Ms. Whitfield," I said evenly, "I'm not only Ethan's father, I'm Chief Jackson Reynolds, Oakwood's chief of police. And right now, you are preventing a minor from accessing public school transportation. That could easily be considered obstruction." Her eyes widened in recognition, but only for a moment before narrowing again. "Being the police chief doesn't give you special privileges," she huffed, though I noticed a tremble in her voice. "You still have to follow HOA rules." The bus pulled up with a soft hiss as its doors opened. "Go ahead, Ethan," I said calmly, gently guiding him around Karen's rigid stance. She suddenly grabbed my arm, her acrylic nails digging into my skin. "We're not done here," she hissed. I carefully removed her hand. Please don't put your hands on me again, I said, my voice low but firm. Ethan glanced back anxiously as he boarded the bus. I gave him a small nod of reassurance. The doors closed and the bus pulled away, taking my son and the morning's calm with it. Karen jabbed a finger toward my chest, stopping just short of contact. You've just made a serious enemy, she seethed. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting tonight. We'll see how long your family fits in when you're buried in daily fines. I maintain my composure. Ms. Whitfield, I'd love to see the specific bylaw granting the HOA authority over children's school supplies. Can you show me exactly where that's listed in the covenants? Her confidence faltered just for a moment. It's under the aesthetic guidelines, she said, defensive. As HOA president, I have discretionary authority to interpret them. I gave her a nod, thoughtful. I see. Then I'll be at the meeting tonight. I'll bring the county code enforcement officer as my guest. He's been interested in reviewing the HOA's policies for state compliance. That did it. A twitch flickered in her left eye. The first sign her grip on control was slipping. Just keep your son and that eyesore of a backpack off community property, she muttered before storming back to her pristine home across the street. I watched her retreat, knowing this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That afternoon, I made a series of calls. First to our family attorney, then to a handful of neighbors who had quietly mentioned their own run-ins with Karen's overzealous enforcement. What I found was a pattern, borderline harassment, and what might even amount to illegal overreach. By evening, I had everything I needed. The emergency HOA meeting was set for 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse. I arrived early, this time in full uniform. It wasn't my usual attire for neighborhood business, but a visible reminder of law, and order sometimes keeps things civil. Karen was already there, surrounded by her loyal faction. She faltered mid-sentence when she saw me walk in. Good evening, I said cordially, nodding to familiar faces. I understand we're here to discuss backpack regulations. A few neighbors chuckled. Karen's expression tightened. This isn't a joke, Chief Reynolds, she said, biting off the title. This is about preserving community standards. She launched into her presentation, clicking through a slideshow filled with examples of visual pollution. One image was a zoomed-in photo of Ethan's Marvel backpack, clearly taken that very morning. This is the kind of garish clutter that lowers property values, she declared. When she finished, she looked at me, clearly expecting a concession, maybe even an apology. Instead, I stood and addressed the room with calm professionalism. Thank you, Ms. Whitfield, for bringing this issue forward. But before we dive into backpack aesthetics, I need to bring up something far more serious. I pulled a folder from under my arm and held it up. This morning, Ms. Whitfield physically blocked my 10-year-old son from boarding his school bus. She laid hands on him, and when I intervened, she grabbed me as well. I have 2 signed witness statements from neighbors who observed the incident. The room fell into a heavy silence. I continued. Under state law, intentionally grabbing or obstructing someone, especially a child, can constitute simple assault. Furthermore, interfering with access to public school transportation violates educational access statutes. Karen shot to her feet, her face reddening with fury. This is outrageous, she yelled. I was simply enforcing HOA rules. The room had gone completely still, the other board members exchanging awkward, uncomfortable glances. I remained calm, steady in my tone. Ms. Whitfield, I began, no HOA regulation overrides state law, and certainly none give you the authority to physically restrain residents, least of all children. I paused, letting that land before continuing. Additionally, I've reviewed our HOA covenant in detail. There's absolutely no clause that extends aesthetic guidelines to temporary personal items like backpacks. The so-called color palette rule pertains only to permanent fixtures, homes, fences, landscaping, not school supplies. I turned to face the room, my voice carrying purposefully. I'm not here tonight to press charges, though I would be well within my rights. I'm here as a concerned parent and resident, because I believe our HOA has strayed far beyond its intended function. That's why I've invited someone who can help us get back on track. All eyes turned as a sharply dressed woman stood from the back of the room. "This is County Inspector Diane Davis." I introduced. "She's here to begin a formal compliance review of our HOA's policies and enforcement practices." Karen's expression instantly changed, her face drained of color. "This is outrageous," she snapped. "You can't just bring in outside authorities without board approval." Inspector Davis stepped forward, composed and direct. "Actually, Ms. Whitfield, any resident can request a compliance review. And based on my preliminary findings, there are troubling patterns of selective enforcement and potential harassment within this HOA. What happened next took even me by surprise. But in hindsight, maybe it shouldn't have. This is a setup." Karen shrieked, pointing at me. "This is a coup. He's using his badge to destroy me." Then, in a sudden fit of rage, she grabbed a thick binder of HOA regulations from the table and hurled it straight at me. I stepped aside reflexively, but the binder struck Inspector Davis squarely on the shoulder. Gasps filled the room. Chairs scraped. Someone whispered, "Did she just throw that?" Without hesitation, I shifted into police chief mode. "Ms. Whitfield," I said, approaching calmly but firmly, "put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for assaulting a county official." Her eyes went wide with disbelief. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." As I recited her Miranda rights, the room remained silent except for the occasional murmur and the shuffle of shocked neighbors. Karen struggled, but I remained professional as I guided her toward the exit. Behind us, the remaining board members scrambled. A vote was hastily called, and within minutes, Karen was officially removed as president of the Oakwood Heights HOA by unanimous decision. "You can't do this to me," she wailed as we passed the community bulletin board, where her name and face had been proudly displayed for years. "I built this neighborhood. I preserved our standards." But her words no longer held power. The next morning, Karen was released on bail. She now faced misdemeanor assault charges and had a restraining order prohibiting her from coming within 100 feet of my son or our home. As she stepped out of the courthouse, a local news crew was waiting. The story had caught fire. HOA president arrested for assaulting police chief's child. It was headline gold. Karen tried to shield her face with her designer handbag, shouting no comment at the reporters. But it was too late. The camera caught every second of her unraveling. That footage, her public meltdown, circulated fast. And in the end, Karen Whitfield wasn't remembered for her tireless devotion to community standards or earth tones. She was remembered for her spectacular fall from power and the moment she lost everything over a 10-year-old superhero backpack.